Good evening or good afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Marty Kaplan, and I'd like to welcome you to our webinar on national security in the age of COVID-19. This is the 12th seminar that the Norman Lear Center at the USC Annenberg School has sponsored in partnership with the Writers Guild of America East and the WGA West. The Norman Lear Center is located in that neo-Tudor pile behind me, or I should say it would be if not for the pandemic. Now no one's located there, but I did want you to see the home that we hope someday to return to. The Lear Center is all about the difference that media makes. Media storytelling, that's what we're about. And the reason is that story is one of the most powerful forces that we in our species have to grab and hold attention, which is the coin of the realm, and to convince people, to represent what normal looks like, to show better selves to ourselves, to depict horror that we learn to recoil from. And the storytellers of Hollywood and New York are among the most powerful people in our culture because they wield that ability to tell stories so well. And the Lear Center has a program called Hollywood Health and Society, and its purpose is to be of service to those writers, to you writers, because you're here watching this, and thank you for being here. We hope to provide accurate information for free so that when you tell stories, especially about public health, and I would include in public health issues like climate change and the risk of nuclear war, that when you tell stories about them, you don't have to make stuff up. You can, and you're, as creators of fiction, you do, but we make it frictionless for you to get expert advice. We will connect you with the best expert in order for free to work with you. And also occasionally we hope to inspire you to be interested in topics, and that topic tonight is national security. And we have with us two amazing experts and also pretty expert storytellers themselves. And in order to spark the conversation and be part of it, I'm delighted to also introduce the most immediate past president of the Writers Guild of America East, my talented friend, Michael Winship.
Okay, here I am. Hi, everybody. Thank you, Marty, for that. And good evening to all of you, all the creative community and everybody else who are here tonight. As Marty mentioned, this is the latest in this series of discussions we've been having over the past few weeks about how coronavirus relates to so many national health and societal issues. We very much hope they've been helpful and illuminating for you. Know too that this is all being recorded and will be available online in the days ahead for anyone who wants to take another look or tell your friends about what happens here tonight. Our past sessions are available too. Know too that we'll be taking your questions toward the end of the evening. So if you go to the Q&A icon down at the bottom of your screen and submit your questions, we'll try and get to as many of them as we can. We have two really superb experts with us tonight to talk about national security in the time of COVID. Ambassador Wendy Sherman will be a familiar face to anyone who watches MSNBC. She is a professor at Harvard's Kennedy School and director of its Center for Public Leadership. She began her career as a social worker and political activist in Maryland. She worked for Senator Barbara Mikulski and was head of Emily's List. She served as Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs during the second Obama administration, and among her many responsibilities was as lead negotiator for the Iran nuclear deal. Joseph Cirincione was very much involved in that campaign for the diplomatic solution to the Iranian nuclear crisis in his role as president of the Plowshares Fund, the organization dedicated to reducing and eventually eliminating the danger of nuclear weapons. Prior to his work at Plowshares, he was Vice President for National Security and International Policy at the Center for American Progress and Director for Nonproliferation at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. He was a staffer on the Hill for 9 years, the House Committee on Armed Services and the Committee on Government Operations. And I should say that today is his last official day at the Plowshares Fund, and we thank him for his wonderful work there. Welcome to you both. I was reading a piece that appeared in World Politics Review in May by someone I think you may both know, Stuart Patrick, who's a senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. The article's headline, "COVID-19 and Climate Change Will Change the Definition of National Security." And in that piece, he writes, the United States still confronts geopolitical competition, particularly from China, as the two jockey for global influence. But the biggest contemporary threats to U.S. security come less from armed adversaries than from two threats without a threatener: a deadly pathogen and runaway climate change. When a pandemic can kill hundreds of thousands, even millions, and when the fate of the living planet is in jeopardy, many issues that once ranked high on the national security agenda, like whether the Islamic State is on the run, or whether Nicolas Maduro's regime is on the verge of collapse in Venezuela, appear less pressing. They seem, in a word, trivial. So, big question to James, and then Wendy, please jump in. Given that all that's happened during this administration, especially over the past few months, is it possible to redefine national security in the terms that he describes in that article?
Sure. Were you pitching that to me?
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. It's not possible in this administration, but it is possible. And this, if a new administration comes into office, I think this will be the major task they will have, this fundamental rebalancing. And if you look in the literature, once you start looking, you will see that there are a dozen or more articles exactly on this theme. Just this month, former Secretary of Defense Bob Gates has an article in Foreign Affairs, the over-militarization of U.S. foreign policy. March 31st, one of the first articles in this was an article in the Washington Post written by a self-described defense hawk, Max Boot, someone who is in favor of the disastrous invasion of Iraq, saying we have to rethink national security. We have to redefine national security, and making the argument that none of the threats that we have faced since the terrorist attack on 9/11 have actually had a military solution. And he includes Iraq in that. And of course, this is true. The financial collapse of 2008, the Russian interference in our election, now the pandemic, the systemic racism that has been revealed, exposed to many of us in our system. These threats that we face as a nation do not have military solutions, but that's where we put our money. 60% of all our discretionary spending on the federal level is devoted to the Pentagon. And this has got to readjust. Basically, there's one fact. The defense budget, the military budget, has gone from $300 billion in 2001, 300 to 740 billion today, poured into these systems, these weapons that actually are irrelevant to the major threat we face. And this will be the challenge for the next administration. How do you start walking that back? How do you deal with this in a responsible way? Because once you build it up, you can't just cut it back to 300. And all those people who are benefiting from those contracts are going to fight tooth and nail to keep them. And yet we're going to have a pandemic to deal with, a depression level economic collapse to deal with, and people are demanding resources for that, climate change to deal with, a healthcare system badly in need of repair. There will be a resource war in the next administration, with everybody scrambling for the funds that are not adequate to deal with any of these threats.
Wendy.
Well, great to be here. And I took this virtual background in tribute to Carl Reiner. And to all of you out there who knew him or worked with him, my condolences. I certainly revered him from afar. And if there was ever a time when we all need a good laugh, it is now. So I'm sure we'll all go back and watch things that he's done all the way back to the Dick Van Dyke Show, find a little humor in this world. I'm coming to you from Cambridge. When I was undersecretary, I could have come to you from 52 different countries during the 4 years that I was undersecretary of state. And the Iran deal I sort of did with my pinky finger, the one that broke during the administration on my way to a secure briefing with the Senate. And just to tell a quick story before I get to answer Michael's important question, I was on my way from giving a secure briefing to House members from senators to House members in the bowels of the Capitol. And I was racing down a stair. My hand was on the banister. I kept going. I stumbled. My hand stayed on the banister. My little pinky finger was at a right angle to the rest of my. Yeah, I was in excruciating pain. My colleagues who were with me said, "What do we do?" I said, "Go find me an ice pack." I went in to do the briefing. It was on. I put my hand down on that ice pack. I was probably more focused than I've ever been in my life. I probably gave the best briefing I ever gave in my life. And because the pain was excruciating, so I had to really focus. When it was all over, the chairman came over to thank me, Republican chair. I was a Democrat for President Obama. And I burst into tears. And he looked down and he realized why I had, took me to the house physician, who of course sent me immediately to the emergency room. And when I saw the orthopedic surgeon the next day, he said, "You've got to operate on this." I said, "Well, what does that mean?" He said, "Well, you'll be in a cast for 6 weeks." I said, I'm in the midst of negotiation with Iran. I write with my right hand. That's not possible. So he gave me a series of I have a crooked pinky finger forever, but it was worth it because it helped us get the Iran deal. But Michael's very important question. This is not new in some ways. Richard Holbrooke, may he rest in peace, when he was ambassador to the UN, he held a Security Council hearing on HIV/AIDS as a security issue, as a national security issue. He understood that this disease, not unlike COVID, didn't really care where you came from. Didn't care if you were a Democrat or Republican. Quite frankly, didn't always care if you were gay or not, because you could get it in any number of ways. And it traveled across borders. In fact, many people believe it was a Swede on an airplane that got it started here in the United States. And so in some ways, we have understood at least some parts of our community in this country, that national security is as much about those things which cross borders, whether that's terrorists taking a plane in 9/11, whether it's nuclear weapons that can cross borders, or whether it is a disease like COVID or climate changes, which probably are part of what gave rise to the pandemic that we're now experiencing. And the other underlying national security issue that we're all coping with right now is disparity between the rich and the poor, between different ethnic groups and religious groups and racial groups all over the world. What brought us Brexit, what brought us, and I believe, Donald Trump, what's bringing authoritarian leaders in many countries, is this enormous gap between the rich and the poor. We're seeing those disparities in our country around the pandemic. We're seeing those disparities in racial justice. We're seeing those disparities in who does the work during COVID. We're seeing those disparities in the economic challenge in front of us. None of these things know borders. They all take different strategies. And we know, as Joe pointed out so well about our military budget, and our military is built for conventional warfare, not the national security issues of the future, not the agile systems that we need for the future. And on top of all of this, we really have to find ways to talk with each other. Yes, we will have to compete with China. Yes, we will have to stop Russian disinformation. But we can't do it by making our police officers look more like our military troops than people who are supposed to help keep our communities safe. So we have a huge demilitarization effort that we need to undertake. We have a huge effort of understanding that even in this time of COVID, when we are separated to stay safe, it is because we are so utterly connected.
Joe, forgive me for calling you James before. You can call me Marty later, but it strikes me that given what Wendy just said about police reform and the current debate over defunding the police in this country, that the situation is kind of similar with the defense budget, the $750 billion annually that you described, and the $2 trillion over the next 30 years to rebuild the nuclear arsenal. That it's the same kind of thing. Is that, you know, in the police budget situation, we're running up against police unions and others who are incredibly resistant to that kind of change. And as far as military budgets and in terms of national security, we run up against the lobbyists and the politicians and even the military officials themselves who don't want to see that kind of change that really has to take place.
Right, exactly. You have to look at the sort of the money here and what's at stake and the entrenched interest here and why are we spending all this money? Well, you know, it's the same as climate change, for example. People make money off of fossil fuels, and if you want to cut back fossil fuels, those people who are making money off it are going to resist it. People make money off of nuclear weapons. People make money off of very complex military systems. Half of the defense budget, half, goes directly to defense contractors. So about $370 billion goes right to them. So if you start threatening that money pipeline, you know, you're going to face some very stiff resistance. When I was on the staff of the House Armed Services Committee back in the 80s, I was working for a conservative Southern Democrat in Jacksonville, Florida, but he was anti-nuclear. He thought nuclear weapons were useless. He wanted to cut the money for nuclear weapons, and he wanted to give it to ships. He was head of the Sea Power Subcommittee. And he had me doing all kinds of amendments to cut the MX missile, to fight the B-1 bomber. We famously led a bipartisan amendment to cut the Star Wars program every year. I mean, we won, by the way, 5 years in a row. But I was sort of a gadfly on the committee staff. And I remember this veteran staffer coming over to me and putting his arm around my shoulder and saying, Joe, 95% of what we do here is keep the money going. The sooner you learn that, the sooner you'll fit in. And he wasn't criticizing me. He was trying to help me. He was just trying to help me understand what I was involved with here, what the machine was all about. So when you look at these things and you look at it as a policy level, and you think of this as some kind of debate between contrasting op-eds in foreign affairs, you know, or panel discussions, you're not seeing what's going on. And what's going on is that in Washington, the defense industry has 727, last count, 727 lobbyists on defense. They spend about $130 million a year protecting these contracts. There are only 535 members of Congress. So there are more defense lobbyists than there are members of Congress. So you are going up against a huge money machine that, of course, creates contracts in districts, that creates jobs in districts. And this is a bipartisan problem. So the Democrats in Montana don't want to eliminate the ICBM base in Montana because it provides 2,000 jobs, right? So you got a systemic problem here, and you're going to have a very determined president in order to change that, in order to roll back that back. Fortunately, what's going on right now is change is coming from the bottom up. These mass movements, this is unprecedented in my lifetime, to see so many people involved in the political life of our country demanding fundamental change on all kinds of issues, but all at the same time. That has got to penetrate the political system and create the kind of dynamic that can give you the fundamental change you need. So I'm fairly optimistic about our chances to win this battle in a new administration, but it will be a battle. It will be a fight.
You know, I say to my students, Michael and Joe, that I came of political age in the late 60s. And I actually left Smith College and went to Boston University for many reasons, but one of them was because I wanted to just take classes where I knew I could do okay, and I wanted to be in the streets every single week protesting the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
And fighting for civil rights. I never even went to my college graduation. For me, it was about change. And it was a brutal and violent time in our country, as many of the people listening to this have written about and done shows about and documentaries and treatments about, where my generation fought very hard, but it was a lot of violence. Students killed on Kent State's campus, the weathermen putting bombs in townhouses in New York City, huge, people setting themselves on fire at the Pentagon to protest the war. The country was profoundly divided, and my generation wrongly treated the troops that were fighting the war in Vietnam like we treated the policy, people we did not want. And those troops and our country paid a big price for the way that we treated those troops and the people that were fighting for our country and what patriotism meant at the time. But out of that very divisive and horrible time, it was really violent. The assassination of 5 people, Robert Kennedy, John F. Kennedy, Medgar Evers, Malcolm X, and of course, Martin Luther King, watching cities turned on fire, came the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, the Vietnam War, the women's movement. Ms. Magazine started not long after. A real change, and the same kind of bottom-up momentum that Joe just spoke of is happening now with some significant differences. Difference because the people in the street are much more diverse, and because the protests in the street are being led by Black Lives Matter, not by white privilege. Mm-hmm. Very different. There's a difference now in that people are locked in their houses. And if they go out and protest, they're wearing a mask, not to be invisible to the CIA or the FBI that we always thought was watching us and keeping files on us, but to keep themselves and other people safe. So there's a sense of civic responsibility to the other in these protests. It's really quite remarkable, the number of young people and older people wearing masks in the protests. Not the same so much in some of the rallies and bars, but in the protests, yes. And it is combining with the disparities I talked about a moment ago, and it's not just happening here. It's happening all over the world. So we see the Belgians apologizing for what they did in the Congo. Mm. We see people questioning whether Churchill's statue should be up. Not because Churchill did not do great things as a war president, but he was a racist in so many ways. And as Joe Biden said today, there's a difference between remembrance and honoring. And we should remember Confederate soldiers, but they should be in museums, not in a place of honor in a town square. So it is a worldwide phenomena that we are watching now. And it will, back to the topic of this, and then I'll stop, it is consequential to our national security. And the country that leads at this time with democratic values is the country I believe that will prevail. But if we don't control the national security threat of COVID, we will not prevail.
Mm. Can I add just 2 fingers on that?
Yeah, please.
This is real quick. It's we agree completely. That's exactly right. Let me just add, Princeton University this week took Woodrow Wilson's name off of the School of International Studies. I have a mug from a lecture I gave at Princeton just a few months ago, Woodrow Wilson School. This change is happening so quick, so dramatically on this one level, and it illustrates what else is going on here. So it's not just a battle over resources. It's not just a battle over the militarization of our national security strategy. It's not just a debate of ideologies. It's also a debate about who makes the policy. And this is what you saw with the women's movement. the rise just in the last few years about gender balance, gender equity, a seat at the table. And now to that is now been added race, the diversity by skin color. Who is making this? And and what the argument is that by having more diverse perspectives and voices making the policy, you will get a better policy. This has been a well-established principle in the business world. It's now coming into the national security world. And when you see these Trump photos of 10, 20 white men, making it's just glaring. It is so out of step with the times and what is now being demanded by many, many people, young and old, around the country, and as Wendy says, around the world.
I agree with both of you on all those things, and I too am part of that generation who was who were demonstrating against the Vietnam War, and I was being tear gassed in Georgetown like a lot of other people were, and in different parts of the city and so forth. Yep, you too. And yet, for all of that, it strikes me that there still is looming over us, over and above and beyond COVID, above and beyond even climate change, is this nuclear. You wrote a book, Joe, called Nuclear Nightmare. I mean, that's still looming over our heads in a situation where the President of the United States might have 10 minutes to make a decision to use nuclear weapons. And that just still scares the hell out of me.
Right. So this is one of the hidden problems. We see the effect of the pandemic. We see the effect of climate change. We see the effect of lack of diversity, for example. We don't see the threat from nuclear weapons because nuclear weapons are hidden. They're in silos buried into the Great Plains of America. They're in submarines patrolling the depths of the Pacific and the Atlantic. They're in remote bomber bases in the South and Midwest. But these things are real. That threat is real. The Cold War is over. We think the weapons went away. They did not. They're still there. They've come down.
Yeah.
Thanks to great policies of Democrats and Republicans, liberals and conservatives, to steadily reduce them, we've cut the global nuclear arsenal by 85%. There are not scores of new countries scrambling to get these weapons. No, effective policy stopped these countries from getting these weapons. We've basically contained the problem of nonproliferation, but we still have the weapons. And now we have arsenals in 9 countries, most of them controlled by autocratic leaders. Who could decide to push that button at any time for any reason and launch enough nuclear weapons to destroy human civilization. Wendy's former boss and one of my partners, Bill Perry, had a wonderful article just in the New York Times just last week with the co-author Tom Kalina about their new book, The Button, talking about exactly.
Just going to talk about that.
Good. Go ahead. There's your lead-in.
It's a wonderful book. It's called The Button, and it really talks about whether the President of the United States should be the one and only person to make this decision in a world in which this could very well happen. The reason that Barack Obama decided it was important to stop Iran from having a nuclear weapon was because if Iran got a nuclear weapon, their ability to project power into the Middle East and to fundamentally change the world as we know it was profound. And so he thought getting the potential of a nuclear weapon off the table would give us the time and space to deal with so many other issues. I think people were profoundly shaken who watched Chernobyl, the extraordinary television program that was made, which was terrifying to watch. I mean, you really have to force yourself to sit there, but people who had no idea what had happened, that these decisions could be taken by a government, which people here in this country thought, gosh, that can't happen here. But I think now they think it could. That if you have an erratic leader that keeps secrets, that wants to make all the decisions, do you really, as Bill Perry and Tom have argued in their book, do you really want just the president to be the one to have his hand on the button? And this was a huge issue in recent presidential campaigns about how quickly that decision can be made. And, for those of us who look for relief from the current president and watch old West Wing episodes to think there could be, thoughtful presidents. There was many a time in those treatments where nuclear weapons were a possibility.
Right.
It's real. It's very, very real.
That's my point. And you mentioned the Chernobyl series, and certainly storytellers have been telling countless stories about nuclear brinkmanship and annihilation, from Failsafe and Dr. Strangelove to the day after. Are there contemporary stories that you see that we should be telling about not just this, but about the state of the world and America's national security position?
I think there are stories that we should be telling both from the bottom up and the top down. There are leaders in this world that are really taking the world to authoritarian leadership, where folks are feeling so insecure and so uncertain that they're willing to give up their rights. We were willing to do so after 9/11. The Patriot Act, we were willing to give up some of our civil liberties for security. We've since clawed some of that back, but we were, because people were afraid. That's happening everywhere. So you take a country like India, which is the world's largest democracy, putative democracy, but a young democracy. By 2030, India will be the biggest everything. The biggest population, the largest middle class, the largest rich class, the largest poor class, the largest young population, the largest old population, the largest everything. It is has so much possibility, technological savvy, entrepreneurship, wealth, but it also now has a leader who is starting inside the country an ethnic and religious war of Hindus against Muslims. And it is tragic. What is happening around COVID in India is tragic. All of the possibility that was there to have a democratic competitor to China, India is completely surrounded by China, its borders. We've just seen a skirmish on the Chinese border where troops were killed. That is a fire where a match was lit, and right now it was a brush fire, but it could easily turn into war. And there are places like that everywhere because of this move towards authoritarian leadership. And I don't mean to terrify everyone that all of a sudden we're going to be taken over by fascists, by dictators. But my dear friend, former boss, business partner, Madeleine Albright, in her book, A Warning About Fascism, her favorite quote is about Mussolini saying, it's like a chicken. You pluck one feather at a time until the whole chicken has feathers left. And that's what's happening in a lot of places in the world. Some of it's happening right here.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned, I want to get a little more specific about some of these hotspots in the world, and you mentioned China and India. Also, the Chinese government has just announced a sweeping Hong Kong national security law that's designed to stamp out protest and dissent there, and violating the agreement they made with the United Kingdom when China took over there in 1997. Do you think, how much of their willingness to do that, do you think, is because we're not there to say don't do it?
No doubt that is absolutely part of what's going on here. The deal with the British were for 50 years. Hong Kong would remain with some autonomy from the Chinese communist system. This undermines that. The chief executive of Hong Kong is playing along because she, quite frankly, wouldn't remain chief executive. The Chinese have control already. What will be interesting is whether people now go back in the streets, are willing to put their lives on the line, because that's what they will be doing by restarting the protests. We've heard Pompeo say this is a bad thing, but I think everybody listening to this and on the screen understands, and we certainly know from John Bolton's book, which I haven't bought, but I have read.
Yeah, those PDFs have been making the rounds.
They have indeed. They have indeed. So we know that for Donald Trump, everything was about the trade deal. North Korea, Hong Kong, everything was about trade deal number one, which is now pretty much down the tubes because of COVID and because there was nothing real there to begin with. It was not much of a trade deal one, but they're still hanging on to that fantasy. And although Trump has talked very tough China because it works for calling it, I don't even repeat the names, that the virus has names that he's using to disparage the Chinese. Right. Even though he's doing that, he's still trying to move forward for gains for the United States while not having a real strategy for anything he does in foreign policy. I've just written a piece. We'll see if it sees the light of day. I write lots of pieces that sometimes do, sometimes don't. But this is a president who only has tactics, only has photo ops, only has campaign slogans. He doesn't really have a foreign policy. He doesn't have strategy, whether it's North Korea, which has just been a series of disastrous photo opportunities and romance letters, or it's been Hong Kong, where there's tough talk, but no strategy. Right. Or China, where it's tactical without a broader strategy. Or Iran, which is pressure, pressure, pressure. To what end? Iran has a larger stockpile of enriched uranium. It has more advanced centrifuges. The breakout time is now back to close to where it was when we began negotiating the deal. They haven't stopped their malign behavior in the Middle East. They haven't stopped their arms trading. They haven't stopped their missile development. They've put more Americans in Evin prison. So nothing has improved. The administration just goes around saying, pressure. The pressure is working. But to what end? It's foreign policy without an objective. It is no policy at all.
Right. Do you see a scenario in which Trump might pull a wag the dog in Iran and try and provoke something, Joe?
Can I
go, Joe.
Yeah,
no, go, Joe.
I do, unfortunately. Now, this has been a president who has not wanted a war. I mean, for all the criticisms I have of this administration, he has understood that a war is not in his interest.
Right.
So, we almost went to war with Iran twice. Right? Most recently in January, after the targeted killing of General Soleimani, almost went to war twice, and there was demonstrations that helped, I think, convince the president not to do this. But most important was the calculation from Tucker Carlson, who convinced the president that if he went to war with Iran, it would close the Straits of Hormuz, shrink the oil supply, push the world into a recession, including the U.S., and Trump would lose the election. So as Wendy says, this is what the president cares about. All he cares about is keeping his power, keeping the election. War, no good, because it hurts him. Great. Well, guess what? The world is already in a recession. The pandemic has assured that. So that restraint on causing a war is now gone. And if the current trends continue, and who knows, but if the current trends continue and you're in September, you're in October, and you're going to lose, and the president's going to lose an election, knowing that means he loses his shield against prosecution for the many frauds he's committed, the crimes that he's committed, he might be tempted to try to wag the dog. One of the best Hollywood movies ever made, by the way, Robert De Niro, wonderful film, and try to rally the country around the flag and wrap himself in the flag. That technique could work. It's possible. And and because of what Wendy pointed out, the erratic nature of our foreign policy, because this administration has done such a masterful job of destroying the basic infrastructure of our national security, the consensus decision-making, it's gone, it's destroyed. They've taken a sledgehammer to the national security system. You now have the possibility, whereas tensions rise in the Middle East, that you could also have a war by stumbling into it, by elements in Iran that would like to have a conflict with the United States, meeting up with elements in the US that would like to have a conflict, and a small incident in the Persian Gulf could flare up into a bigger conflict. So those two things, an intentional wag the flag or stumbling into war, are very real, and we have to be on the alert for both of those.
Well, they have that, go ahead, Wendy, I'm sorry.
I just add one point to that. We think about this from our point of view. We also, and this is something I talk a lot about in my book, which is part memoir and part national security, not for the faint of heart, Lessons in Power, in Courage, Power, and Persistence. You have to look at this from Iran's point of view, too. Yeah. Iran had been a very successful country, a large middle class, very literate, almost fully literate country, unlike a lot of countries in the Middle East. Yes, reliant on oil, but a complex society with a lot of different pieces to it. The supreme leader didn't want war either at the time of Soleimani's death. It was not in his interest to have war because he knew that America was likely to win a conventional war. And so if he's going to wage war, he wants to do it on his terms with asymmetric warfare, which they're pretty successful at in the Middle East. So he didn't want war. But Iran is now in a deep, probably depression, ransacked by COVID, under a lot of pressure. The presidential election is in 2021. The parliamentary election happened this past year, and the Guardian Council and the election system only allowed very conservative, what I call hardliners, to run. So the parliament is now very much to the right. Those who will be allowed to run for president are probably going to be very far to the right. People are starting to jockey into position, including Ahmadinejad, who was the crazy man before Rouhani. So the calculation for Iran may change also because of its politics. We all have to remember that the people on the street in Iran were saying death to their own regime as things were playing out. And then we killed, or the Trump administration killed Soleimani. I'm very glad he's gone. He was a bad man, but I probably wouldn't have taken the risk. And the people on the street turned to death to America. Now, some of this is created by the administration in Iran. I know that because I lived through death to Wendy Sherman and posters about killing me on the streets of Tehran during the negotiation. But some of it's very real. And the spark of nationalism is profound and is a technique used by authoritarian leaders and dictators to get the country on your side. So from Iran's point of view, what Joe just laid out could also become in their interest, even if they didn't know what would happen. And because they see that the US, not the president, but underlying the president, not so sure about Saudi Arabia anymore, because Israel's wrapped up in a lot of its own politics at the moment, they may see an opportunity, and that is a very dangerous brew.
Well, this is, given what both of you just said, this is why I found especially disturbing Carl Bernstein's reporting on CNN last night that in hundreds of highly classified phone calls with foreign heads of state, Donald Trump was so consistently unprepared for discussions of serious issues, so often outplayed in his conversations with powerful leaders like Putin and Erdogan, and so abusive to leaders of America's principal allies that the calls helped convince some senior U.S. officials that the president himself posed a danger to the national security of the United States.
Well, I think this is demonstrably true.
Yeah.
He poses a
I think we knew this, but the specificity was sort of staggering.
Or, for example, the story that's now dominating this discussion about that he knew that the Russians were putting a bounty on the lives of American soldiers in Afghanistan. He knew this, and he did nothing about it. And still, to this moment, when he now acknowledges that, yes, he finally has been briefed on it, he's claiming he wasn't briefed, which is its own incompetent storyline. But now that he knows, he still hasn't done anything about this, and all the while he's arguing to allow Vladimir Putin to come back into the G7. I mean, this is treason. This is treason. Any other president would be hauled up on the dock. There'd be impeachment hearings right now if there's any president. But Trump is sort of, we're the frog and the pot has been boiling now, and we're kind of used to this to compensate, even when it gets to this gross level. So you asked about stories. There are a lot of stories to tell about this administration, and those stories have to be told. Mm-hmm. They have to be unpacked. They have to be revealed for what actually happened. You could fill 5, 6, 7 film scripts, story scripts, with the kind of outrages that have happened in this administration that will have to come to light when we finally remove this regime from power.
I rarely agree with Senator Ben Sasse on matters of policy. But he said the other day, my questions are, who knew what when and how? And if the president didn't know, why the hell not?
Yeah. Right.
I don't know if you, for those of you who watch Rachel Maddow, it's worth your time to go watch Susan Rice last night.
Yeah, right. Yeah. She was fierce.
She sliced him and diced him. And it wasn't a partisan attack. She was just explaining National Security 101, how this is supposed to work. Just watch her. It is a brilliant and educational performance. It'll take you about 10 minutes and you will learn so much.
I agree. And the fact of them saying they couldn't reach him for 3 hours while he was on the golf course on Sunday is just horse hockey. It's you're surrounded by everything from a medical doctor to your Secret Service agents. You don't have to have your own telephone. You rarely have your own telephone. It's just absurd. And it means he didn't take the call. He told them he wasn't taking any calls. Or he got the call, and like in many instances, they're lying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And just, by the way, the golf course reminds me, some of the best writing about this has been done somewhere with the help of Hollywood Health and Society. The best fictional description of the issue we were talking about before, the launch on warning, the pressure on the president to launch nuclear weapons, was done with the help of Hollywood Health and Society and working with the writers of Madam Secretary. That is a brilliant piece of writing. It's just an element in a story, but it was riveting. It was riveting. And then the organization awarded the Sentinel Award to the HBO series Chernobyl last year. I was pleased to be there for that ceremony. For another brilliant piece of writing, history, something that has happened, something that was no longer an issue. But by writing that riveting story, you made it an issue. I can't tell you how many people talk about Chernobyl now, know about Chernobyl, compare it to the kinds of denial and disinformation that we're seeing now on the virus. That story had a huge impact on people's understanding, not just of the nuclear accident, but of the mechanisms of denial and disinformation that authoritarian governments use.
I have friends who actually went there after the series aired, who actually went because they wanted to see it with their own eyes. Yeah. So listen, 2-part question. Basically, what frightens you the most about the prospect of a second Trump administration? And on the other hand, if Joe Biden might manage to get elected, what would you advise him to do first thing in terms of national security?
Well, just without going into too many details, just for the sake of time, I'm worried about the rise of authoritarianism, about what Madeleine Albright says. I wouldn't call Trump a fascist, but he's definitely on the spectrum.
Mhm.
And American democracy can survive one Trump term. I think we can recover from this, but he's dug a big hole for us. I'm not so sure about two. I mean, it would be enormously damaging to the very fabric of the country. If he's elected, we're going to have to rethink our priorities about what we have to organize about and what we have to fight about. And we really are going to be in a struggle for American democracy at that point. What would I advise Joe Biden? Make a list. Make a list of all the executive orders you have to repeal. Make a list of all the people that have to be cleaned out. Do not make the mistake that Barack Obama made of turning the page, of not going back and looking at the people in the Bush administration who lied us into an unnecessary war of choice and saying, well, we don't want to provoke partisan. No, you're going to have to hold people accountable. You can't let them get away with this. They may be able to escape justice for 4 years. You can't let them escape justice once they've been pushed out of office.
Do you think there should be like a 9/11 commission or a Truth and Reconciliation Commission?
I do. You are going to need an independent body set up to document the damage that has been done so that you can correct it, to build your consensus that you need to turn the other page. I also think if Trump loses, there's going to be a major reconstruction job in the Republican Party. One of the books I'm reading now is Steve Bannon, the executive producer of the Nato Show, has written a brilliant book. I recommend it. I did a podcast with him a couple of weeks ago. I have a little podcast, or had, called Press the Button. And his book is called The Imposters. And it's how the GOP went from a governing party to what he calls a post-policy party, which is this other dynamic that's happened since Barack Obama, where it doesn't matter what the other side's policy is, you oppose it for political gain. You oppose it, in this case, to keep power. So there's going to have to, if Trump loses, the GOP, I think, is going to be in a profound identity crisis. Who are they? What do they stand for? Who are their leaders? That means that with that party in disarray, the next president has enormous political space to do what's right, to do the right thing, and not just, go halfway on something. No. Now you get your chance to really do what's right on healthcare, really do what's right on climate change, really do what's right to demilitarize our national security strategy.
So one story I hope someone will write, it will be a frightening story, is the power of Mitch McConnell.
Mm-hmm.
When Joe talks about how the GOP has to recreate itself, you had a majority leader of the Senate who said his only objective was to win the presidency of the United States. The only objective. His objective was not to be a patriot. His objective was not to be a citizen. His objective was not to build America's democracy. It was not to bring the country together. It was strictly partisan election. So when we look at Donald Trump and we say he only cares about himself and his election, he's not the first to have said that or to make it real. I think there's a huge story about the power that Mitch McConnell has wielded. Right. None to the good, in my view. Mm-hmm. I don't think he was always quite like this. He was always tough. I remember when I was on Capitol Hill and when I was the Assistant Secretary for Legislative Affairs in the first Clinton administration, he was tough, but you could deal. But that's gone. It's all gone.
That's exactly right.
Something?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And this is what's changed. I mean, America's gotten used to the idea that there were two parties, one a little more liberal, one a little more conservative, but it was a policy of ideas, a policy of governing ideology. That's what's gone. And Mitch McConnell and Newt Gingrich were the leaders of that. They changed it. So it's almost impossible to form a compromise. Why is the Senate at a standstill? No compromise. It's all about, no, I am not going to give you a victory. Why did President Obama have such a hard time on the New START treaty? A very modest treaty supported by the entire military establishment, the entire national security establishment, because Mitch McConnell did not want to give a Democratic president a victory in an election year, 2010. Mm-hmm. Why did he have such fierce opposition to the Iran deal? This is the strongest non-proliferation agreement I've ever seen. Wendy did a brilliant job. She constructed a deal so good that it's still not dead yet. They tried for 3.5 years to kill it. They can't do it because it's such a good deal. All our allies supported. Why was it such a fight? Because Barack Obama was supporting him. He didn't want to give him a victory. So
they're
that's
actually
a story to unwrap and tell about what's happened to the American political dynamic.
NPR actually did a good series of podcasts on the sort of devolution or the evolution of Mitch McConnell's career, which I think is worth listening to, because you do, as Wendy suggested, you see this change in him from this, conservative. Actually, I found an op-ed piece he wrote when he was first starting in politics in support of campaign finance reform. But he has turned into this creature who's just basically that Groucho Marx song, whatever it is, I'm against it.
Right. Well, he has said that about himself, that he's the Grim Reaper. So he's owned who he is. I think in terms to briefly answer your question, because I'm mindful of the time, I don't think our country will be our country if Donald Trump's elected for 4 more years.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that's most on the minds of young people these days, certainly now it's Black Lives Matter and economic disparity. But before all of that came to the fore in the way that it needed to, it was climate change, and it's still climate is
right
high on the list. And that will be nowhere. That will go backwards. All of the anti-regulatory moves that he's made will even get more so. He will feel he can do anything. He can do anything he wants.
That's right.
Completely. So it will be Katie bar at the door. He will have gotten away with so much that he will believe he can now get away with more, and he won't have to run again. So what does it matter? And I've got 2 tiny little grandsons, 4 and 6, and I fear for their future.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it is about for me. I want to make sure that my grandsons can grow up in a peaceful world that certainly will have conflict, but people who try to solve problems, not create more conflict. So that is what I worry about. I really worry about who we are. I often end a lot of my tweets when I'm angry saying, this is not who we are.
Right.
It's who we are becoming.
Mm-hmm.
Will be who we will be if he is reelected. Now, in terms of Vice President Biden, both the Vice President and the people around him aren't beginners. That's the really good news. They understand how Washington works. They understand how to use power. They understand how to use, but not use authority. They know that Congress and the populace matters, that they have some humility. Joe Biden's actually apologized for things, not because he thinks it's weak, but because he thinks it's wrong.
I wrote a piece about 3 weeks ago saying that if Donald Trump simply said, "I'm sorry, I made some mistakes, I'm going to try not to do it again," his popularity would go up a good 6 points.
It would certainly go up if Joe Biden thinks it's manly to wear a mask.
Right.
Donald Trump doesn't. Donald Trump, it's so narcissistic, he believes he doesn't need to wear a mask, as Kayleigh McEnany said today, because he's been tested every day. He doesn't have COVID, so he can't give it to anybody. He has no idea that it isn't about him. It's about the power and authority he has to teach the country, to lead the country, to be there for the country. And that's what Biden will do. And I think he will do it because he knows how, and the people around him know how. He will do it because he is going to make history. A woman is going to be in the White House as Vice President of the United States. Since we're all talking about the pieces we wrote, I have a piece that'll come out in the Hill this week about the fraught path of women to the White House. And we all have to register and vote and persist. Shirley Chisholm ran for president in 1972. And look at all we've been through, including Sarah Palin, right?
Right.
Tried it, didn't get there either. So this will be extraordinary, and it'll mark the change, the growth, the evolution of this country, which, yes, makes lots of people uncomfortable, but Joe knows how to make people feel like he's in their living room too. In national security terms, he will pick up the phone and call people, but I think he understands everyone in the world, everyone, even our former closest friends, the ones who won't let us travel to their countries now, will be wary.
Yes.
The transformation will not happen overnight. It will take arduous work. And the world is not where the world was in 2016. The world has moved on. China's moved on. Russia's moved on. Disinformation is still a very real and present danger to our election. So there's a lot of work.
Right. Well, going to Joe's point, I have this fantasy image of Joe Biden on 12:01 on January 20th, releasing 6,000 executive orders, just overturning all of this stuff. Listen, I want to remind the people who are watching that we do want to hear your questions. If you have questions that you would like to put to our two panelists here today, I do have one here, which I will read. Considering the condition that this country is in, with the lack of leadership at the top, the systemic racism, the pandemic ravaging the world, the problem of climate change getting worse every day, will our country become unstable, more unstable, no matter the outcome of the election? What do we need to do? Good question.
Well, let me just start. The first answer to that is yes. I mean, you can't suffer the kinds of shocks that are happening to our system and not be more unstable. You know, this economic recession / depression is not going to go away. People are talking about 2024, 2025 till we fully recover from it. So that's right away, that's instability. This pandemic is still in its beginning stages. You heard Dr. Fauci today. We could be heading towards 100,000 cases a day. We're at about 20,000 now. So this is going to make us more unstable. And then you have these societal divisions that are coming in. I think rightfully fighting back against the systemic racism that we've tolerated for far too long in our police forces and other instruments of government power. But now people are demanding that they change. And there is some change to it, but there is going to be resistance to that. I mean, whether it's governmental resistance or it's suburbans carrying automatic weapons, like we just saw on the streets the other day, right? Now, it's going to be a mixed bag, because, I mean, we just Mississippi made history yesterday.
Yes.
People have been trying to get that flag changed for a very long time, and they just did it in about a week. So all of this, the good, the bad, it's all in flux. It all introduces elements of change, of uncertainty, of struggle, of conflict. So yes, if Joe Biden is president, a lot of people are going to be saying, why do you want that job? This is, I mean, apart from getting Trump out, this is going to be an enormous task. I can't think of a president that's going to come in with a more daunting task than that will face Joe Biden and his running mate. Wendy, what do you think?
I agree. It's going to be enormous. It took us at least a decade to recover from the 2008 recession. And this is more profound, because COVID won't be over. And because we have structural problems within our society, and our infrastructure's in worse shape than it was in 2008. So, and the systems that we have for dealing with things have changed. Our business system has changed. When Amazon is as dominant as it is, as technology companies are as dominant as they are, when it's not about bricks and mortars, it's about capital intensity. It's just a very different world. So I think that economic recovery is going to be much more than a decade in happening. It doesn't mean we won't start to make progress. I am hopeful we will. I believe tremendously in the resilience of this country. But I want to take us back to how we got here in some ways. And the way I tell this story is, think about the 55-year-old white guy in the middle of our country who had a manufacturing job and he lost it. And he may have lost it as much to technology as he did to trade, but he lost it. And blaming another country is easier than blaming a machine. So he lost it, and he's told to take a computer coding course, and after 2 years, he'll make half of what he made before. His deal with his wife was she wouldn't have to go to work. Now, I may make another choice in my life, but that was their choice. Now she has to go to work. The people down the street that they were always very nice to can get married. And what's that about? It felt like that happened overnight. The people who are moving into their neighborhood are brown. And they may go to the mosque, but they certainly don't go to his church anymore. Now that guy has real anxiety through rapid social, technological, and global change. It's real and present for that guy. He's angry. There are two ways to deal with that. Feed the rage or heal the fear. Enough people came to the polls for the first. Fuel the fear. Fuel the rage. It won't go away if Joe Biden is elected. And because of COVID and racial injustice, which has now been even further unveiled in the disparities of who's died in COVID, let alone police reform that is needed, and racial injustice on the streets. Joe Biden still has to deal with everybody and even more people for other reasons who are going to feel he's not progressive enough. He's not moving fast enough. So I agree with Joe. This is one hell of a time to want to be president of the United States. It really is a hell of a time. But I have faith both in the resilience and the goodness of the people in this country. And that guy in the Midwest who wants what everybody else in the world wants, to have a decent job, to have a safe community, to have his kids get a good education and have a better life than he and his wife had. Everybody wants that all over the world. Mm-hmm. And so I think Joe Biden gets that. I think he's going to speak to it. And I think he's going to speak to it for both the young people who have been in the streets with their masks on and the guys who have been at the president's rallies without them.
You know, we're getting to the end here. I wanted to ask you both a personal question, which is just basically that, Joe, you worked on the Hill, and, you know, Wendy, you worked on the Hill. You started out as a social worker and then were involved in political activism. How did the two of you make the transitions into what you do now? Wendy, you made the transition into diplomacy, and Joe, you made a transition into doing the working against nuclear proliferation. How did you guys make those dramatic segues?
Well, the first is staying on the Hill long enough to learn how a bill becomes a law, really, you know, and understanding that mechanism and understanding that dynamic, both the good and the bad. You know, you saw the heroes cross the aisle and make deals that worked for the country, and you saw the sort of corruption going on, so you understood it. And then learning how, for me, I got my doctorate sort of on the Hill. I really learned about nuclear weapons. I went to the place where they were being made. I went to the place where they were being deployed. I was an observer at NATO conferences where the policies were being debated. You just learn so much being on the Hill. And then, you know, a time came for me to sort of move on, to sort of do it. And it was a fairly easy transition. And Washington is sort of set up for this mechanism. You know, people talk about it, how you move from the Hill to the executive branch to the think tank world, which is where I went to study, to take some of that practical experience and marry it up with the theoretical debates. And in my case, for advocacy. That was my particular route, to advocate for policy changes in the back. Some people also go to the contractor world, and that's the iron triangle of the contractor world, the Pentagon and Capitol Hill. And there's a path there in Washington that most people take. You could become very rich in Washington, D.C., as long as you're willing to work for defense contractors. They will pay a lot of money. Some guy once told me, he said, Joe, you can get a lot of money for what you know, for the connections, the way the legislation's made. So for me, once I left Capitol Hill, it was just more liberating for me to be in the outside world, to be able to write. I started writing books. I think I wrote 5 or 6 since then. It's worked for me. Wendy, what's your story?
Well, first of all, since this is Joe's last day as the president of Plowshares, I want to say to you, Joe, it's worked for all of us. The Iran deal was able to get through the congressional review process and happen here in this country because a lot of outside advocates, but one of the leading advocates was Plowshares, that was with us every step of the way, giving advice, talking to members of Congress, talking to the American public. And Joe Cirincione's voice was at the front of the line. And so I want to use these few moments to thank Joe for his extraordinary leadership and assure everybody listening to this, it will not end as he steps down as president. I have no doubt that Joe will find his voice. I'm sure he will find his voice working with some of you to figure out how to write scripts and what the technical needs are. I'm not a technical person. I'm a generalist. My training as a social worker was as a community organizer and as a clinician. And I use those clinical skills with dictators and members of Congress. And I use the organizing skills, which is to see everything around you, to figure out what the objective is and how you put the strategy and the tactics together to reach that, how you mobilize all the stakeholders to get there. So whether it was a political campaign or building a business, I like to build things, better at that than maintaining them, building a business or doing a negotiation, it's the same skill set. And the last thing I'll say is a very strange story. I was a partner in a Democratic media consulting firm with David Doak and Bob Shrum. Many of you know Bob because he's out in LA now. And I was making ads. I made Jane Harmon's first ads when she ran for Congress from California. Made ads for Jerry Ferrara when she ran for Senate. And I got a call. I was having friends over for dinner on a Sunday night, and I got a call from Tom Donnellan, who was then a partner in O'Melveny and Myers. And one of the partners in the firm, who Tom did not know, Warren Christopher, was going to become Secretary of State for Bill Clinton. And people in O'Melveny had told Chris that he should have Tom Donnellan as his chief of staff. So Tom called me and said, Warren Christopher would like you to meet you tomorrow. And I thought to myself, well, why the hell does Warren Christopher want to meet me? And I hadn't even been for Bill Clinton. I'd made TV ads for Bob Kerrey. So I do believe, though, that you never say no, that you have to take risks in life. So on Martin Luther King's birthday, I went and met Warren Christopher. And he said to me after we talked for a while that if the president agreed, he would like me to be the Assistant Secretary for Legislative Affairs at the State Department. And I said to him, well, if you want someone who knows everything there is to know about national security and foreign policy, I'm probably not the right person. I believe you have to be honest. But if you want someone who understands how Washington works and knows enough and is a very fast learner, I'm a quick study, no long-term memory, but great short-term memory, maybe I'm the right person. I ended up being nominated and confirmed to be the Assistant Secretary. And until I took the job at Harvard Kennedy School, I've only been doing national security and foreign policy in either the public or the private sector. I continue to do it to this day, at the same time talking about creating just, effective, and principled public leaders. But you never know what will happen in life. That's what you all write about. That's what your treatments and screenplays are about all of the time. I'm lucky to have lived such a life so far.
Well, that seems like an ideal way to wrap this up. I'm gonna get all your books. This was terrific. I'd just like to thank the two of you, Joe and Wendy, and I'd like to thank everyone from Hollywood Health and Society, Marty and Kate and Leica and Melissa, and the folks at the Writers Guilds East and West. As I mentioned at the top, you'll soon be able to watch this online in a day or so you can have your friends and colleagues watch it too. It'll be available on YouTube and Hollywood Health and Society and the two Writers Guild websites. Kate, is there anything you wanted to add? Did you want to talk about the next episode or anything like that?
Sure. First off, thanks to everybody, including Michael. I've already had texts from people saying this is the best panel I've been to yet. Amazing, and Michael's an amazing moderator. So thank you all three, and congratulations, Joe, on completing a career. I saw you pouring that, so that's why I wanted to say that. But next week,
Permission to drink, sir. Thank you. Granted.
July 7th, we're going to talk about LA protests, past and present. So please join us for that. We're going to have a special chat with Norman Lear, as well as a number of other really interesting discussions going on. So please join us. And before we close up, when you sign off, you will get a little survey that pops up, and we'd love your input on how you felt about tonight's panel. If you don't have time to fill it out tonight, you'll probably get it in an email tomorrow, so we won't let you get away from us without telling us what you thought. But thanks again to everyone, Wendy and Joe and Michael. It was fantastic. I want to move to Mars now, but other than that.
Just for the atmosphere.
You want to move to Venus. It's men who go to Mars. We go to Venus, Kate.
Okay.
Oh, that's right.
All right. Have a good night, everyone.
Thanks,
Take
everybody.
care.
Have
Be
a
safe,
safe
be
and
well,
sane
be
4th
just.
of July. Yeah,
Indeed. Be safe out there.
be very safe. Stay healthy.